Table talk, Godfather speech, jury flash and toast glasses to the mash and forever wanting more, never wanting less. The secret to success be the motherfucking best. The secret to success.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Roundtable Talk, where I dissect, analyse and review the latest releases as well as some old classics. It's that time of the year again where everybody's listing their albums in a year, and on this channel it's no different. Overall, I'd say I think that this year's been a little bit weaker than last year in terms of really strong bodies of work. But I think there's been a lot of gems dotted throughout the year, and there's some records I've really enjoyed listening to, and I know I'm going to be coming back to all throughout next year, of course, too. So, just like last year, I'm going to run through my top 25. I do have a full list of actually 50 albums, which can be found in the description box below. But I'm going to run through the top 25. Numbers 25 to 10, I'll probably speed through and talk a little bit about them. But then when we get to the top 10, I'll be diving into each of those 10 albums in a little bit more detail. So yeah, let's not waste too much time. But before I do begin the list, please do remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and follow me on all the social links below. Hoping in the new year that I'll be releasing a lot more videos and a lot more content. So yeah, subscribe and stay tuned for that. But yeah, let's dive in with number 25. Coming in at the tail end of this top 25 list, we've got Snow Allegra with Temporary Highs in Violet Skies. Found this album nowhere near as cohesive as her previous work, which was one of my favourite albums of 2019, and one that I really do regard as a classic, to be honest with you. But that said, it's still a wonderful body of work. I love Snow Allegra's voice, and actually really looking forward to going and seeing her live in February. COVID permitting, obviously. Then coming in at 24, it's Terrace Martin with the album Drones. This album's got the jazzy eclecticism that you come to expect from Terrace Martin, from his previous work with the likes of Kendrick Lamar, and lots of legendary work over the years. But on Drones, you've got some really experimental production, as well as just a fantastic roster of guests bringing their A game as Terrace usually brings that out of them as well. Then at number 23, we've got Arlo Parks with Collapsed in Sunbeams. Really clever songwriting, smooth vocals, make this project just a really easy listen from front to back and all the way through. At number 22, we've got Tory Lanez with Alone at Prom. This album sees Tory doing pretty much what he does best, and that's imitating other people. It's not really a shot, but I think it is a fact of, Tory's artistry is often quite clearly influenced by his peers and his predecessors. This time around, he's trying on the whole sort of 80s guys that the Weeknd sort of dabbled in over the last year, as well as a few other pop artists as well. But this album makes onto my list purely because it's an 80s aesthetic, which personally I enjoy anyway. But also despite the fact that it's clearly wearing its influences on its sleeve, it's done so well that it almost doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter to me anyway. Then at 21, we've got UK MC Gets with Conflict of Interest, which is a true showcase of everything Gets has to offer as both an artist and as an MC. Some surprisingly strong hooks on this album, as well as the sort of visceral lyricism that you're always going to get from Gets. And I feel like this album really does place him among some of the best out of the UK, in the very fact that he's been able to put together such a solid body of work all the way through, which a lot of grime MCs or UK hip hop artists really do struggle to do. Then coming in at number 20, we've got Adele with 30. I'd say overall the album's a bit too ballad heavy and a bit too safe, or plays it a bit too safe for my liking. But of course you can't deny the power of Adele's voice and the level of vulnerability that she definitely shows on this album, particularly on that fantastic standout for me, My Little Love. But yeah, I've always wanted Adele to experiment, so for me, that's probably why this album falls a little bit lower than maybe on other people's lists. Then at 19, we've got Don Toliver with Life of a Don. Pretty much like Tory Lanez's album, this is pretty derivative of his contemporaries, using melodies and inspiration very much clearly from the likes of Travis Scott, who of course he signed to, and Drake, even acts like The Weeknd and even bits of Justin Timberlake throughout the album. But again, similarly to Tory, when it's done this well, it's just really enjoyable to listen to, and that's pretty much why it makes my list. It's just something that I found myself coming back to throughout the year. Next up at 18, we've got Cleo Soul with Mother. This is just intimate, spacious, soulful jazz music, pretty much, with a little bit of an R&B influence, of course. And it's an album that's a fantastically serene listen all the way through, and it's really just fantastic to see that Cleo Sol, after all these years of work, is finally getting the critical recognition that she's deserved all along, in my opinion. Maybe I'm biased, she's from the UK, as am I. But yeah, moving on to Baby Keem with the Melodic Blue. A really interesting debut from someone who's clearly been tapped as sort of the next up. It's pretty much Kendrick's apprentice, but there's so much Kanye influence in him, so much Drake influence as well. I do wish that he'd had some of the singles that he released prior to this on the album, like No Sense, which I think is a brilliant song. And despite this record not really being as cohesive as maybe as I expected it to be, it's still a fantastic body of work, and the highs on this record are particularly high. Then we've got Nas with King's Disease 2. I've gone for KD2 here instead of the recently released Magic, just because I haven't had enough time to sit with Magic as a body of work yet. But based on my first few listens to that record, I do think it probably is going to become my favourite of the two records. But despite that, I really think that King's Disease 2 is some of Nas's best work in such a long time, and pretty much since Life is Good, way back in I think 2012. And he and the producer Hit-Boy, who obviously exec produced the entire thing, are just a match made in heaven. I think they bring the best out of each other. I think Nas brings the best out of Hit-Boy's beats, and I think Hit-Boy brings out a different side to Nas and really helps modernise him in a way that I didn't really think was possible this late in his career. Then at 15 we've got Wolf Alice with Blue Weekend. A really artful, ambitious record that only really adds to the fantastic catalogue that Wolf Alice are building up. They only release music, I think it's five or so years apart, and it's really worth the wait every single time. I haven't really seen this album on many other people's lists, so if you haven't listened to it, please do give it a shot. It's this sort of indie shoegaze dream pop almost, mixed with classic rock, and I think it's just a great album. Definitely check it out. Then at 14 we've got Dave, We're All Alone in This Together, another esoteric offering from UK MC Dave that both production wise and lyrically captures the real sort of ominous, almost traumatic feel of the last couple of years, particularly in the UK. It does lack a true concept tying it together like his debut, and I think that kind of hurts it for me anyway personally, as well as the sort of middle portion of the record, which seems to be a very clear attempt at radio hits, particularly the song with Wizkid, as well as a couple of others. But overall though, still of course a fantastic body of work from someone who is making music way beyond his years. Then at 13 we've got Silk Sonic with An Evening With. This is just a smooth update, modernisation of the classic 70s soul sound, and just feels totally authentic, coming from Anderson .Paak and Bruno Mars, both bringing fantastic vocals, and just such a palpable sense of fun throughout the entire record. Flies Me is just my absolute jam. But this short but sweet project, every track is pretty much a winner, and I do hope that if there is a second record at some point, that it's a little bit more fleshed out conceptually and thematically. But overall, of course, just a fantastic body of work. Coming in at 12, we've got Heady One with the mixtape Too Loyal for My Own Good. It's an exceptional mixtape that, unlike Edna, the album that I found pretty one note and a bit of a disappointing step down from the EP Gang, this mixtape sees Heady experimenting and branching out a little bit more, especially melodically, and to be honest, those melodies are why I'm such a big fan of it. There's some great samples in there, and I just think he did everything on this project that I wanted him to do on Edna, and it shows that he is just much more than just drill, and that he's a much more well-rounded artist than that. And then just missing out on the top 10 is Lana Del Rey at number 11 with Chemtrails Over the Country Club. For me, just again, a really great listen all the way through. It's almost too cohesive in a sense that it is quite hard at points to distinguish one track from the other, but I'd probably go all out there and say that this is my favourite Lana project since Ultraviolence, which is close to a decade old. So yeah, just her best body of work I think in a little while, definitely her most engaging for me personally anyway. But yeah, that's all the way up to 11. Let's now dive into the top 10. Starting with number 10, which is probably going to be a surprise to many people, but not to followers of this channel. It's Certified Lover Boy by Drake. So, Certified Lover Boy is a source of real conflict for me. You know, if you've watched any videos on the channel, you'll know how big of a Drake fan I am. And for me, it's not really difficult for me to say that I think that Certified Lover Boy overall is a pretty bad project, a bad body of work. It's too long. It's, you know, way less cohesive than a lot of the albums I've already gone through that didn't make the top 10. But I feel like it would be disingenuous of me to say that there's not music on here that I don't enjoy. As you know, a massive Drake fan, you get all sides of Drake on this. But yeah, as I said, I'd happily admit that I think this is probably, at the moment anyway, very low down in my ranking of Drake projects. That said, there's some real great music embedded in here. The discussion on the Certified Lover Boy, I probably could go on about it for ages in where it went wrong, how it could be improved, and where I'd love to see Drake go next as an artist. But the numbers speak for themselves, and it seems as though that's what Drake is focused on at the moment at this point of his career. It's clear to me that this album's very insular, and that doesn't necessarily mean bad in terms of Drake music, but I feel like Drake has gone on record and said before that, you know, he's inspired by conversations and everyday life situations, and of course, you know, over the past 2 years, he's not really been able to do that, and I think it's telling in the music. Not that that's an excuse in that, you know, certain big events have happened in his life that he could be talking about, other than his beef or, you know, previous beef with Kanye West. That reconciliation with Kanye West just a couple of months ago does now affect some of the album's, you know, more incisive and bar heavy moments like 7am on Bridal Path or No Friends in the Industry. Some of those just don't hit as well as they do now, knowing what we know and knowing what comes after. That said, you know, I don't think it could be argued that Drake still continues to get better on a technical level, especially rapping wise. Tracks like Champagne Poetry are proof of that, and there are moments here and there of experimentation, like you know, In Too Deep. And then you've got tracks that I would probably say are, you know, pretty much classic Drake tracks now, like Fair Trade, Roast My Mind, and while he's definitely fallen victim to, you know, chasing number ones, and while there's no real reason for Drake to make a track like this, again, it's another track I have a conflict with. If you check my channel, you'll see my first reaction to the track Way Too Sexy. I hated it. But then when you hear that track in the setting it was made for, in a club or a bar or a party, you can see how much of a banger it really is. But at the same time, that doesn't make it a great song, and it's definitely not a song that I think that an artist of Drake's stature needs to be making at this point in his career. But as I said, there's still so much music on this album that, you know, as I said, it's too long, but there's so much music on this album that I really do enjoy. Drake's still the caption rap king, and I do wish some of the leaks that have come out over the past, you know, year or two leading up to this album hadn't have happened, or that he'd, you know, combined elements of Dark Lane demo tapes with Certified Lover Boy. But again, they're all, you know, what ifs, I guess. But that said, I feel like the amount that I've come back to this album, the replayability of it, of certain tracks, definitely means it deserves a place in my personal top 10. So yeah, that's number 10, Certified Lover Boy. The essential tracks I'd say from the album are Race My Mind, Free Trade, Champagne Poetry, and In Too Deep. On to number 9 now, and it's Pink Pantheress with To Hell With It. This is a really short mixtape, probably about, I think it's just about 27 minutes, 26 minutes, and honestly, the first time I listened to it kind of blew me away, just from the influences she's drawn from, the you know, different sound of her voice, evoking sort of elements of Lily Allen, but bringing in sort of old school UK garage and drum and bass. It's just a really sort of unique, ethereal project that somehow manages to be both really short, that doesn't outstay its welcome, but also manages to feel like a fully formed project at the same time, which I really just have no idea how she's managed to do that. A lot of the lyrics and the sort of soundscapes that are constructed really do sum up the restlessness and the longing for nostalgia, I guess, of the past few years, as we all seek to, you know, remember the times before COVID, before the pandemic. It's something and that sort of longing for nostalgia is something that, you know, can be seen in, you know, not just in music, in TV and film as well. But yeah, it just really captures that. But yeah, as a project overall, really captures that post-party depression that the Weeknd used to address. The reference points that she uses, like UK garage, like emo music, all really feel quite genuine and not opportunistic. She adds a real spin to the samples that she uses, and also imbues those with an immediacy and an intimacy that feels really connected to her generation. Really one that I didn't expect to enjoy. I hadn't really heard anything from her when I turned this on. And it just, blew me away. I'd say the essential tracks for me were Reason, Just For Me, Must Apologise, and Passion. Next up at number 8, we've got Sam Fender with 17 Going Under. Again, another album that I didn't really expect to be making my top 10, but it's just again an album that I found myself coming back to over and over again ever since it dropped. There's just so much urgent angst in the music, and so much sincerity too. I love how clearly that Sam draws from his influences, like Brandon Flowers, like the band Muse, all of whom draw from Bruce Springsteen as well, who I'm pretty sure Sam Fender has said himself he draws quite heavily from. But for me, what made this album really stand out, stand apart from some of the singer-songwriters we've had in the UK over the years, is the real sort of psychedelic elements to his music and the use of live instrumentation. Some of it really reminded me of Tame Impala, particularly the saxophones and the sort of tension building that is done through the use of different types of guitar. And I think lyrically it's probably better when it's more personal to Sam. When he veers into the sort of political territory, it gets a little bit shaky in my opinion, but overall I found just this entire album a pretty cathartic listen, and it feels as though it's like a confessional throughout really, and just one that, again, as I said, I didn't see myself enjoying so much, particularly when I wasn't huge on his first album, but it feels as though he's really stepped it up on this one, and I'm really excited to see honestly where his career goes from here, as he's so young. Essential tracks for me were Spit of You, and The Dying Light. And coming in at 7 is Tyler the Creator with Call Me If You Get Lost. This record is a real sort of throwback to Tyler's Odd Future days, but then executed with the sort of maturity and finesse that he's gained ever since then, ever since 2010, 11, when Odd Future first burst onto the scene. Shout out Micah Richards. It's got that real sort of grimy mixtape feel, obviously created by DJ Drama pretty much hosting the album as well. I think for me, I've much preferred Igor as a record. Again, I'm a sucker for a concept album, and just thematically, I think Igor was more my cup of tea, I guess, if I can sound any more British. A Success is pretty much the narrative of Call Me If You Get Lost, with bits of personal relationship issues dotted in there, but I guess they're all sort of related to how success has affected those relationships as well. But it really does position Tyler as a bit of a tastemaker while still having sort of the visceral energy and embodying the sort of controlled chaos, I guess, that defined Tyler's early records. There's also a real freedom to the record. It feels as though Igor as a concept kind of confined him in some ways, and you can feel the sort of breaking it and the fight against that on this record, despite the instrumentation being out of this world at points, and just so sort of luxurious that you could hear Rick Ross rapping on a lot of these beats. But overall, feels honestly like a little bit of a victory lap for Tyler, with Igor and Flower Boy having given him a real foothold in the rap game, and this record just really sees him talking his shit about that. I'd say my favourite tracks, the most essential tracks from this record for me were Massa, Safari, Hot Wind Blows, and Sweet. Coming in at 6, it's Vince Staples with Vince Staples. Similarly to UK MC Dave I mentioned earlier, I feel like this album really captures the sort of melancholy, the isolation, and the way that isolation and trauma has affected artists in general, not just in music, as I said before, but in all different mediums. I think it's safe to say that there's a real Mac Miller influence on a lot of the production and the flows and just the vibe this record creates. I know that Vince was obviously a very close friend of Mac's before he passed away, and it feels like this record is a little bit of a tribute to him at times, despite of course being very Vince too. It's a lot more low-key. Vince is a lot less animated than he has been on past projects. There's a real sense of sort of dejection and subtlety throughout this album. It sees Vince adding his own spin, I guess, on particular trends, his own flavour, but it feels very nostalgic, as I said before, with Vince really seeming haunted by his past in a lot of these tracks, with Kenny Beats providing really sort of moody, pensive, almost lo-fi soundscapes for Vince to sort of inhabit. But yeah, there's some really clever writing on this. Again, it's short but sweet, and definitely captures a paranoia that I think Vince has been trying to tap into for quite a while actually. Essential tracks for me were Are You With That, Lil Fade and Take Me Home. Let's move on to the top 5 now. Coming in at number 5, we've got probably what I'd say is the most underrated album in my entire top 10. It's Yebba with Dawn. I think this album's pretty incredible, and one that kind of occupies a space between lots of different genres, and I think that's really why I like it. But it brings in, you know, elements of pop, elements of R&B, jazz, that kind of, you know, evoke a mix of almost Stevie Wonder and D'Angelo at times. Executive produced by Mark Ronson. There's some really sort of lush arrangements, but the real star here is definitely sort of the vocals that Yebba provides. They're really poignant, create some really immense grooves, and lyrically she even manages to address some pretty heavy themes, but then also manages to have fun at the same time. I think it's just a tremendously well balanced album that really showcases everything this artist, this singer can do, and she's just got this real ability to almost, you know, half sing, half rap on some of this production, but then also her vocal range is just out of this world. She's helped by you know her collaborators, or her choice of collaborators, all very sort of cool musicians like A$AP Rocky, Smino, K-Tronada, James Poisner. You know, there's so many great people involved in the making of this record, and you can really hear it. It's just an outstanding piece of work and an outstanding body of work. And as I said, yeah, I think it's really underrated. I haven't seen it on too many lists, and I feel like it really deserves to be there. She writes like a folk singer. She sings like a rapper. That's probably the way that I'd sum it up to anyone who's never listened to this album. I think it's just, yeah, one of the best albums of the year, and one that deserves more praise than it's getting. Essential tracks for me were Louis Bag featuring Smino, One More Smile, and Love Came Down. At number 4, we've got James Blake with Friends That Break Your Heart. You never really know what to expect from James Blake these days. You know, his last album was very ballad heavy, but he's obviously dabbled in electronic music, hip hop, you know, all over the years. And I think that this album might find him at his most comfortable, at least sonically, and feels probably the most traditional James Blake album that brings in a mix of all of his different influences, or all the different genres that he's tapped into over the years. But lyrically, there's a real sort of emotional shift on this album, in that it sees him, you know, quite the polar opposite to what we had on the last album, which was, you know, very sort of lovey-dovey and romantically focused. This one sees him, you know, sounding abandoned, dejected, and again is, you know, symptomatic of the last few years that we've lived in probably. But yeah, James's voice has always been really expressive, and it's so impactful on this record, paired with production that's a bit of like a fusion of, you know, the electronic stuff that he's done in the past, patient balladry, but also sort of the lush string sections that were incorporated into the last project. I'd say it's probably a little bit melodramatic at times. There's lots of talk of betrayal, the loss of something, but as I said, it's not too clear what he's particularly talking about, and I feel like without knowing the little bit more of the details, it does come across as a slight bit dramatic at times. At the same time, I'd say there's much more of a thematic focus on this record. I'd probably go all out there and say it might be his best record since his debut. I'd say it's probably his most creatively produced, his most creatively put together and produced. Lyrically, some of his best, and feels a little bit like a culmination of his catalogue so far. Essential tracks for me were Coming Back featuring SZA, Life Is Not The Same, Say What You Will, and Foot Forward. Next, on to number 3, we've got J. Cole with The Off Season. The Off Season is a project I'd say crept up on me. I enjoyed it on first listen, but I feel like it was, in retrospect, looked at it in comparison to some of the other records that rappers released over the past year. I really started to see just how good The Off Season actually is. I think overall, as a record, I think it's a true display of an MC at the top of his skills, brimming with confidence in terms of his abilities on the mic. It sees Cole playing with flows and cadences, and almost mastering a sing-songy flow that he's never really used before, incorporating some of the flows of, you know, the likes of Lil Durk and Lil Baby, who he works with obviously on this record, but you know, still not compromising his own lyricism, which I think is an incredible achievement and one that's kind of gone under the radar. He's probably, I'd say, this is the most engaging Cole has been as an MC since Forest Hills Drive, maybe even Friday Night Lights when he had that, you know, on the come up hunger. And while it's Cole, it is, you know, most dynamic, I'd say. The album overall does like a little bit of depth, a little bit of intimacy, a little bit of emotion, I guess, at the start. I'd say this is probably the most consistently well-wrapped album of the year, that towards the end has some really moving moments, some jazzy instrumentation that really lends itself to the stories that Cole is telling. And also, as it gets towards the end, we get a lot more introspection from Cole, the self-analyzing Cole that's really preoccupied with, you know, identity and legacy, and it's just that's the type of Cole that I grew up with and love to hear. So yeah, I think overall it really solidified, for me anyway, Cole's position in, you know, the top 3 of this generation, and this probably is a top 3 Cole project to me as well, probably coming in just after Friday Night Lights and Forest Hills Drive. Standouts for me were Hunger on Hillside, Pride is the Devil, Close, and Amari. Into the top 2, and just missing out on the top spot, is Kanye West with Donda. Much like Drake, this album is way too long, but on balance, when you look through the amount of tracks that are here and how many great songs are actually on this record, it's kind of mind-blowing. It actually manages to be quite cohesive as well, which I don't really understand how he's managed to do that. From production to lyrics, feels like a real extension and a real progression from Jesus is King, and brings in that sort of religious aspect without compromising the real hip-hop sensibilities that you know, that we really want from a Kanye West project. Yeah, his production is so progressive on this album. There's not too many drums on there at all, really. There's some real storytelling moments. It's a real hard one to nail down and talk about, just because there's so many different elements that work within it. But we get flashes of some of, you know, Kanye's best rapping in almost a decade probably, but also some of his best singing as well on a lot of different tracks, which was a real nice surprise. Outside of, you know, the dramatic rollout, the beef or obsession that he, you know, clearly has with Drake, this record really does deliver. And I'm not going to pit it against, you know, CLB, because they're very different artists, but if I were to, I'd say probably Donda is the more artistic piece of work, just overall. Of course, bits of it are self-indulgent and it definitely needs an edit. There's a real sort of cold desolation, rawness to a lot of the music on here, with Kanye exploring the loss of his family, his divorce, linking all of that to his mother, and there's a real sort of suicidal, depressive edge to the record overall. But at the same time, I think these sorts of emotions have always brought the best out of Kanye, from, you know, on Dark Fantasy to 808s and Heartbreaks. I think that kind of emotional upheaval gives Kanye a creative stability and a creative focus that he really needs. It touches on themes of forgiveness, structured, sort of leading to almost a rebirth at the end of the album with Come to Life, and feels like a really compelling, more sincere vision of Kanye's relationship with faith. As I said, I feel like on Jesus is King, we just sort of, it was very surface level, whereas with Donda, we get a real idea of how Kanye West views his own faith in relation to his family and in relation to his career. And while there's definitely too many features on this record, and perhaps overshadowing Kanye at times, that he definitely, as always, brings the best out of his features. The likes of 5 Year Foreign being a prime example, and again continues to really utilize his collaborators as instruments, which I don't think any artist is able to do as well as Kanye West, really. I think it's probably his best overall record since The Life of Pablo, which, you know, was almost a decade ago, and as a massive Kanye West fan, it's just a pleasure to hear that, you know, this far into you know, a 20-year career, he can still deliver some of this great music. And also, as a Kanye West fan, I'm glad to see that his creative focus, at least for now, has definitely sort of stepped up a level, and really excited to see what he delivers next. Central tracks for me were Jesus is Lord, Off the Grid, Remote Control, Believe What I Say, and Come to Life. And finally, we've made it to my number one album of the year. And I think if you've been tapped into sort of musical culture over the past year, I don't think you can be too surprised by the album that I've chosen, and it's Little Simz with Sometimes I Might Be Introvert. I really don't have enough superlatives to describe how great this album really is. I was a huge fan of Little Simz before Grey Area was, I think, in my top 5 albums of 2019 or 2018, whenever it came out. I think Simz is an incredibly talented artist, but I never expected an album of this level from her at this point in her career, at least. Some of the production on this album is the best of the year. Incredibly cinematic, incredibly filmic, and a huge shout out to Inflow, the producer, who I think oversaw pretty much everything on this. But it's also some of the best rapping of the year as well, alongside J. Cole, but unlike J. Cole, has so much depth behind it, and so much personality and emotion that Simz is able to imbue every single bar with. It's just beautiful stuff. It's soulful, grand, theatrical, without being cringy. It brings in elements of musical theatre as well, and retains that real sort of London council estate grit that Simz is able to bring to all of her music. The concept that ties it together has a real narrative to it. Something again that I'm a sucker for. I love a concept album. I love skits and voiceovers that tie an album together in terms of putting out themes and things like that. But the content here is just so rewarding as well. Talking about family, love, celebrating women, blackness, art, and framing Sim's own career as almost on like a spiritual trajectory. As she refines her own identity and how she relates to her family. I just think that the layers and levels to this album are just undeniable, and it's one I think that is going to gain even greater appreciation the more people listen to it, the more people analyse it. Something I really may do at some point on the channel. Reminds me a lot of Janelle Monáe at times in its commitment to the narrative, in its sort of classy orchestral instrumentation, and also just the sound and scale of this album really remind me of Kanye West dark fantasy as well, particularly the track Introvert, but there's so many examples of it all over the record. I was blown away the first time I heard Introvert, and then sitting down and listening to this album all the way through. Every single track builds on the last, and it just got better and better. And I just think it's easily for me the best, most complete, and most essential body of work to come out in 2021. And I'd highly recommend it to anybody who's not already heard it. Essential tracks for me were Introvert, I Love You, I Hate You, and Standing Ovation, which is exactly what Little Simz deserves for this just exceptional piece of work. So that's it. That's my albums of the year. I hope you enjoyed finding out my top 25, as well as hearing a little bit about what I liked about these albums as well. I'm really intrigued to hear your guys' top 10s. So please do, in the comments below, list your top 10s. Let me know of anything that I might have missed or I might not have heard. I'll also, as I said before, list my top 50 in there. So that's 25 extra tracks that I didn't actually go through. But yeah, apart from that, I hope everyone's staying safe, staying well. It's a strange time, but stay tuned for more content from me in the new year, more reactions, more analysis, and just more music chat. Apart from all that, subscribe to the channel, like the video, follow me on the socials below. Until then, and until next year, thank you, good night, much love.